So this is it. We're finally giving up land life and moving out of our house for good to go and live on our sailing yacht, Ocean Melody. But why do we want this and how do we get it? 5 years ago, Melissa and I were sat in our living room watching a video by Pam Wall. Pam and her husband Andy met in Fort Lauderdale and began a truly unusual, adventurous life together. They had their honeymoon aboard a tiny 30-foot sloop crossing the Atlantic from Fort Lauderdale to England and spent 3 years sailing around Europe. The two then sailed back across the Atlantic to build a new, larger boat and a crew to sail with them. For the next 10 years, Andy had the job of building the larger 39-foot sloop, and Pam had the job of building the crew. Pam not only helped Andy with the building of the new sloop, but provided a lovely daughter, Samantha, and 4 years later, a strong and jolly son, James. The Wall family set out to circumnavigate the globe in 1985. The vessel, Candaric, was their home-built boat, and their crew was Andy, Pam, Samantha aged 8, and James aged 4. 6.5 years later, they sailed back into Port Everglades after sailing together as a family around the world. Their story inspired and thrilled us and filled us with a desire, and we knew right then we had no choice but to do whatever we needed to follow in their footsteps. We've spent years dreaming about this and planning and preparing for this, but now it's actually happening, and it's a very strange experience for us all. I've been sailing most of my life, and I grew up sailing dinghies as well as climbing and hiking and exploring in the mountains of the UK and the Alps and in Europe. Melissa has always had a burning call to travel and live an unconventional life, and has built and converted several camper vans and vans long before it became fashionable and trendy to be a van lifer. But that day we made the decision to take our family around the world on a sailing yacht and to spend a few years getting ourselves ready and finding and preparing a suitable vessel on which to set out. Inevitably, when you make this kind of huge decision to abandon everything that's considered normal and the ordinary way of approaching life in order to have a go at pursuing this agreeable state known as existence in a more extraordinary way, it leads to some pretty intense soul searching and reflection on how our minds and desires work. So it's no surprise that this episode and the last few have maybe been a bit thoughtful and reflective. So our ambitions and goals were set in motion as we worked our way up from a tiny coastal cruiser to a larger, long-keel GD28 called Miss Rosie. If you've been following us for a while, you know what happened next. Just when we thought we'd got the perfect boat for the three of us, along came Oliver. Now, we'd been trying for a baby for 5 years, and due to medical conditions, we never thought we'd have another child. So we'd built Steel Melody to be perfect for the three of us, with a double bed in the forepeak and a single in the aft cabin. So although it was unexpected, we were filled with delight when we discovered that Melissa was pregnant, although it meant we would need a larger boat. We started looking out on the internet for a larger project boat with the notion that we'd pick one up 2 or 3 or 4 years later, but we were in no rush. And within a week of starting to look, again totally unexpectedly, we found this Bowman 46 centre cockpit yawl, a true blue water thoroughbred, and she was going very, very cheap because she'd been sitting on the hard for 11 years and was in a terrible state, full of water and covered in black mould. But our ambitions and desires were not reduced, and although it meant embarking on yet another restoration project, we were not dissuaded from our original plan. Ambition and goal setting, though, don't quite deliver the happiness they promise. And to work out why, we need to look a little bit more deeply at how we tend to desire things. We are all desiring creatures. Right now, I desire to edit this video, and hopefully you desire to watch it. We carry out almost all of our actions in order to fill some larger goal that we desire. Perhaps, for example, you start quickly skimming through this video because you want to get up from the sofa in order to go to the kitchen to assemble a snack because you're hungry. The desire to eat creates a chain of smaller desires, some of which are more intellectual than emotional in nature, but all are designed to ultimately satisfy a need. We're slaves to these desires in one form or another. We of course know that after we've fixed ourselves a snack from the fridge, we'll be hungry again sometime thereafter, but this does not trouble us as we assemble muffins, Marmite and butter. It's a part of an endless chain of desires. We eat, and then after a while we desire to eat again. The problem arises when we fail to see the same process in operation regarding our less essential desires. We are currently, as I write, in the process of moving all of our worldly possessions out of the house and onto the boat. This move has been part of our plan, desire and ambition for the last 5 years. But desire is a funny thing. Why do we actually want things? I desire at the time of writing the 5th incarnation of the Sony Corporation home entertainment internet-enabled smart gaming device known as the PlayStation 5, mostly so that Jack and I can play Hogwarts Legacy, but I know it won't make me any happier. After a short while, roughly equivalent to the time it takes me to explore its new features and get used to exploring the mythical castle from the Harry Potter books, I will feel exactly the same about it as I do about my current one. Clearly Sony know this and keep developing new models at such a pace that will make my non-ownership of the newest and best painfully obvious to me, adding negative enforcement to the process. There is the pleasure of the new model and the displeasure of knowing that mine does not have certain features being enjoyed by everyone else. How pathetic. But what does it mean to decry mindless consumerism when I know I will run out and mindlessly snap up the new one just because I know I can? William B. Irvin, a philosophy professor at Dallas University, offers the following thought experiment. Suppose you wake up one morning to discover you're the last person on Earth. During the night, aliens had spirited away everyone but you. Suppose that despite the absence of other people, the world's buildings, houses, stores and roads remain exactly as they had been the night before. Cars were now where their now vanished owners had parked them, and petrol or gas for these cars was plentiful at now unattended gas stations. The electricity still worked. It would be a world like this, except that everyone but you was gone. You would, of course, be very lonely, but let us ignore the emotional aspects of being the last person and instead focus on the material aspects. In the situation described, you could satisfy many material desires that you can't satisfy in our actual world. You could have the car of your dreams. You could even have a showroom full of expensive cars. You could have the house of your dreams or live in a palace. You could wear expensive clothing. You could acquire not just a big diamond, but the Hope Diamond itself. The interesting question is this. Without people around, would you still want those things? Would the material desires you harboured when the world was full of people still be present in you if everybody else vanished? Probably not. Without anyone to impress, why own an expensive car or a palace or fancy clothes or jewellery? Irving continues to suggest that alone in this imagined world you might try these luxuries for a while, but would soon, for example, find a dwelling that was easy to maintain rather than a palace. You'd obtain clothes that were comfortable to wear rather than expensive. You would probably lose all interest in your appearance. The thought experiment shows that we choose our lifestyles and our houses and our clothes and our watches with other people in mind. One way or another, we project a style designed to make others admire or envy us. The style may not, of course, be about what's strictly fashionable. We all have some sort of image we like to project, and whether that image is trendy, tweedy, or just a mess, there will be something we're identifying with and choosing to show the world. We can't really criticise the fashion victim for being a slave to convention when we're living according to an equally well-defined alternative protocol, however heretical or hipster or highbrow it might be. We have all drawn our style references and aesthetics from somewhere. And if we say we never give any conscious thought to what we wear, the chances are very high that we at least dress a lot like others in our peer group. We've all seen friends walking down the street sporting minor variations of the same wardrobe. Irving's thought experiment shows that our desires would diminish drastically if we didn't need to impress anyone. Our requirements would probably become limited to what we think of as natural and essential desires: food, water and shelter, and so on. This doesn't sound like a particularly pleasant existence or a lifestyle we would choose, but we would certainly be liberated from the desire to impress others. We might find that we find this notion that we spend so much energy and time seeking the approval of others quite eye-opening. Epicurus, not to be confused with the Stoic Epictetus, saw human needs as divisible into 3 categories, and Schopenhauer clarified these. 1. Natural and necessary needs, which cause pain if not satisfied, essentially food and clothing, which are easily to satisfy. 2. Natural but unnecessary needs, such as sexual satisfaction, which are more difficult to satisfy. And 3. Neither natural or necessary needs, such as the latest gadget, other luxuries and personal fame, which are without end and difficult to satisfy. In other words, the more necessary a desired thing is, such as food and shelter, the more readily we usually find it's available and the more easily we'll be satisfied. On the other hand, entirely superfluous things that we desire, whether they be gadgets, fame or wealth, are much more difficult to secure and very rarely satisfying. There is always more or better to be had. Such unnecessary things, of course, constitute the vast majority of our desires, and once we realise that satisfaction is relative, we see that we may never achieve it as long as a notable disparity continues to exist between what we feel is worth attaining and what we actually possess. Unnecessary desires are without end, because that disparity will always push us forwards towards desiring more and more and more, and therefore towards further dissatisfaction. And they're difficult to satisfy because they either come at great cost or because of their never-ending and self-perpetuating nature. This is why people who live in simple circumstances often surprise us with how happy they are. Now, this all sounds very dreary. How might we find hope amidst this hopelessness? Unexpectedly, it is precisely at the heart of this dilemma that we find the answer to the conundrum. And we must first do away with the notion that happiness is something straightforward, a simple thing to which we are entitled. Happiness is a chimera. It is imaginary and deceiving in its many forms. Like the rainbow which so commonly symbolises it, happiness is an optical illusion that retreats or hides itself the closer you approach. But the news is not bad news. Happiness, if you think about it in the right way, is quite achievable. It's about understanding what we really need and what we really desire and aligning those two elements and forgetting about chasing rainbows. So this huge step we're taking isn't some frantic attempt to chase a dream. It's not some attempt to impress other people. It's not a desperate attempt to run away from reality. It's about us learning to take stock and be mindful of our true desires and relishing the experience of exploring them as we travel together as a family into the future, one little step at a time. So we're just a normal family, trying to work out how life works, trying to work out what we really want and how we really want to live. And we've finally reached the point of taking the big leap from living in a house to living on the boat. Now, to some that may seem extraordinary and crazy. To others it may seem like a mediocre achievement and really nothing that special. But to us it marks the biggest step that we as a family have ever taken and the beginning of a whole new chapter of our lives.
Right, so plan is we leave some of the stuff in the car because I don't think there's any more room.
No, the boat's right. So yeah, we'll just take the bare essentials out. We've got everything's on the boat that we need.
Yeah.
Apart from one or two bits that we need to take tonight.
Yeah.
And we'll just.
Are we going to go out for dinner or are we going to eat in? I'm not cooking on the boat tonight. There's just stuff everywhere.
Yeah, we'll either order a takeaway or we'll go out for a meal.
Yeah. Jack, there's a good chance that you might not be able to sleep in the aft cabin tonight.
I don't know. There's only a few things on Jack's bed, you know, on the smaller of the two beds. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he will.
Yeah. I know I started sort of stowing stuff away on.
I put a few things on there today, but I think he'll be all right.
Yeah.
Not on the bigger of the two beds.
No.
But on the smaller of the two.
Okay.
But worst case scenario, you sleep in the saloon.
Yeah. Our bed.
I can clear our bed in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Ooh, something that we need to do next week. Well, fairly soonish, is make some shelves in the wardrobe because that will
really increase the storage
space
capacity. Yeah.
And then I reckon from tomorrow onwards we've like massively purged. But we're probably going to end up throwing more stuff away.
More, get rid of even more stuff. Yeah. It feels good though because we've got rid of pretty much everything we own.
Oh yeah.
I
found it
so little.
Really freeing. I think because we've kind of lived here, there, and everywhere, and just stuff has stuff has kind of just accumulated in places, and boat bits and this and that. Every time I got back to the house, it was just like, oh, I can't deal with this, and I'm really excited about having less in a smaller space.